Okay, so we're making good progress. So we've already covered steps 1 and 2. Now in this video, we'll actually cover step 3 of updating our REST service to throw the exception if the student is not found. Okay, so let's go ahead and move over to our REST service here, our student REST controller, and we'll make those updates to throw the exception. So I'll kind of zoom out a bit. I'll expand my window over here. So I'm in my student REST controller, my REST service. I'll move down to that get student method. And so this is where I want to add some logic here to check the student ID. So I'll write a quick little comment here to myself. Alrighty, so I'm going to check the student ID against the list size, and I can do this with an if statement. So here I'll just check to see if the student ID is greater than or equal to list.size. Or if the student ID is less than 0. If that's the case, then I'm actually going to throw an exception. And so when I throw the exception here, I'll throw a new student not found exception. Again, that's our custom exception class we created earlier. And so I'll simply give the message, hey, I couldn't find a given student ID, and provide the actual student ID that we couldn't find. All right, so that's the basic coding there for checking that. So remember from that little diagram we have up top, so data comes in, bad data, then we're going to check that ID. And if it's bad, then we'll actually throw the exception. So that's the logic to kind of handle that part of it. And then if everything's A-OK, we make it past that if statement, then we simply return the students.getStudentID. So that's a happy path. So they pass in a valid ID, we're A-OK, we simply get the student and return it accordingly. All right, so that's good stuff. So that kind of takes care of step 3 of throwing the exception. We're making good progress, so we've covered steps 1 through 3 so far. Now we'll cover step 4 of adding an exception handler using the exception handler annotation. So with this step 4 of adding an exception handler, that diagram we have in the top right, we have the code for throwing the exception, but nothing for handling the exception. So that's where we need to do this now. And we'll actually add this code in our student REST controller. We'll add an exception handler for this given application, and we'll make use of that add exception handler annotation. So I'll just get some white space here to kind of stretch out a little bit on the screen. I'll give this add exception handler annotation, and then I'll actually write out the method signature. And for now, just say return null, just to kind of give us some basics here, and then we can kind of focus in and drill down on some different parts of this coding. So remember, the add exception handler annotation says, hey, this method's an exception handler. We tell the actual response type, and then we also have the actual exception type as far as what we're going to catch. So here we're saying that this coding or this exception handler can handle or catch student not found exceptions. So we have the basic coding stubbed out. Let me just write some quick comments here to myself, just so I know what I need to do inside of this method. So I'll need to create the student error response and also return a response entity. Alrighty, so let me just go ahead and create a student error response. I'll just call the constructor here for this student error response. And remember, that's a custom error response object that we created earlier in some of the previous videos. And then I'll simply go through and just set the values here. So I'll set the actual status. That's the actual HTTP status code of not found. That means 404. Then I set the actual message for this error response to be whatever the exceptions message is. So I'll say exception.getMessage. And then finally, I'll set the actual timestamp. So I'll say error.set timestamp, and I'll get the current time in millis. All right, so that's the basic code in there for setting the appropriate values on this error response object. Okay, so now moving to this next area here, I need to return the response entity. So here I'm going to create a new response entity. And then I give the actual error, which is the body of the response, and then the actual status code for this response. So the status code will be HTTP status dot not found. So I give the body, comma, the actual status code. And remember, Jackson will be responsible for taking that Pojo class and converting it to JSON accordingly. So when it goes back to the client, we'll see this nice error response just like we have here on the screen. And that's really what we were shooting for in this video series.